Hi, everybody. It's Jay, and I am back in the booth with you for another sneak peek video preview for this week's new release here on Say with Jay. Our new release this week is Just a Cowboy's Love Story. Just a Cowboy's Love Story is the fifth entry into Jessie Gussman's fantastic new sweet romance series, The Flyboys of Sweet Briar Ranch. Now, Just a Cowboy's Love Story is the story of Jane Hines. Jane is the diner owner there in Sweetwater, North Dakota, and it's also about Elias Stone. Elias is the newest resident at the Sweet Briar Ranch, having just left the Air Force in somewhat rather clouded circumstances. Now, while the story is most certainly Jane and Elias's story, it belongs, in good part, to Jane's daughters, Merritt and Sorrel, and their best friend, Tony. Because if you've been following this series, you know that Merritt and Sorrel and their best friend, Tony, have been scheming to find husbands for their respective single moms, and coincidentally, dads for themselves. They've had varying degrees of success, and by that I mean no success at all. But this time, they think they have come up with a surefire plan. Now, I'm not going to spoil any more of that, but I will say that it involves cooking. Now, because it involves cooking, I bet you guys know what's coming. That is right, we're doing another segment we like to call Cooking with Jay. Now, I will have more about the book and a live preview reading for you in a bit, but for the uninitiated, for the last several new releases, Jessie has been including a dish somewhere in the framework of her story, and I've been making it here for you. That's what we're going to do here today, but I admit I'm a little bit nervous because I don't know that we've had a dish that is quite so central to the story as this week's dish. It's called Marry Me Chicken. Now, it's one I've made several times, love it, and while I think it might be incorrectly named, it hasn't helped me. It is a really fantastic dish that your family and friends will love, and it's really pretty simple to make. They will think you have put a lot more time and effort into it than what you'll have to. So, without further ado, let's roll up our sleeves and make Marry Me Chicken. All right, before we start, as always, don't worry about trying to capture all these ingredients and their amounts in real time. I'll list them all in the description of this video down below. You might have to hit show more, see more, whatever it says on your particular device. First ingredient, no surprise, you're going to need chicken. 3 to 4 boneless, skinless chicken breasts, and you need them sliced into thin cutlets. You can buy chicken breast cutlets already sliced thin at the grocery store. You can, as the recipe that I use suggests, slice them lengthwise yourself. To me, that sounds like a great way to win a trip to the emergency room. So instead, what I do is place each chicken breast in a gallon Ziploc bag, close it loosely with a little gap for air to get out, and then use a meat tenderizer to pound it flat. The goal is to have your chicken between 1/4 to an inch thick. Otherwise, if it's much thicker than that, you may need to cook it longer to make sure that the chicken is cooked all the way through. You can always use a meat thermometer to make sure that that internal temperature gets to 165 degrees. Moving on, you're going to need 6 to 8 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. You're going to need 2 tablespoons of olive oil, 2 tablespoons of butter, 3 cloves of minced garlic. You're going to need 1 cup of chicken stock, 1 cup of heavy cream. You're going to need a 1/2 cup of grated Parmesan cheese, And then you're going to need 1/3 cup of sun-dried tomatoes, chopped roughly, and 1 tablespoon of fresh chopped basil. Finally, you need 1/2 teaspoon of oregano, 1/2 teaspoon of thyme, and 1 teaspoon of chili flakes. So our first step is to season our chicken with salt and pepper. Then you're going to dredge the chicken in the flour and shake off any excess. Next, in a large skillet, heat your olive oil and melt your butter on medium heat. Add your chicken pieces in to brown them, and be sure not to overcrowd your chicken. Do this in 2 batches if you need to. You want to brown your chicken for 4 to 5 minutes on each side until it's nice and golden brown and cooked through. Don't be bashful about using a meat thermometer to check that temperature. Make sure it hits 165 internal. Once that's done, put your chicken into a dish, cover it, and set it aside. After you remove your chicken, you want to add the garlic to your skillet and saute it for just a little bit until it's nice and fragrant. After that, add your chicken stock, and you're going to deglaze your pan by scraping any bits stuck to the bottom of the pan. Next, you're going to adjust the heat to medium-low and add the heavy cream and the Parmesan cheese to the skillet. Give that a good stir, and then you're going to allow the sauce to simmer for a few minutes. Then season that with your chili flakes, thyme, and oregano. After a few minutes, add your sun-dried tomatoes and season it with salt and pepper to taste. I usually will let it simmer for a few more minutes until it starts to thicken. Once it does start to thicken, then you can add the chicken back in the sauce and let it simmer and thicken for yet a couple more minutes. Finally, garnish with that chopped fresh basil and serve your Marry Me chicken. And ladies and gentlemen, that is all there is to making Marry Me chicken. I hope you'll try it, and if you do, please let us know how it goes in the comments. All right, let's talk a little bit more about Just a Cowboy's Love Story. As I mentioned before, Jane Hines is the owner of the diner there in Sweetwater, and she's a single mom. And between her girls and trying to make ends meet with the diner and make it successful, she has no room in her life for anything else, certainly not a romance. Elias Stone has just come to Sweetwater after planning on making a career in the Air Force. When he has to make a decision to keep his integrity intact and not reveal something he promised not to, he finds himself court-martialed. And he had bought part of the Sweet Briar Ranch with his crew, intending it to be a business investment. But now he finds that he needs a place to live and to pick up the pieces. Again, marriage and family and romance is the farthest thing from his mind. So can these two different personalities come together to find love? You'll have to come back this Friday to find out. But we've got a live preview reading for you first. Now, this scene actually does require a little bit of setup. The preview that I'm going to read is Elias's first visit to the diner, right after he's arrived in Sweetwater, and he's looking to just get some supper. He walks into a diner that is extremely short-handed. Jane's regular waitress is homesick, and she has been trying to hire and bring in another person, sight unseen, that she's only talked to via text messages, a person named Laya, which she assumes is a young lady. At any rate, this is a little scene from Just a Cowboy's Love Story. Hope you enjoy it, and then come back this Friday for the full video here on Say with Jay. Elias surveyed the diner, the door closing behind him. It was colder this afternoon than it had been the night before, and he had a feeling that it was going to get worse before it got better. As was his custom when he walked into a room, he stopped and checked it out, looking for anything that seemed out of place. Maybe it was his years in the military that had trained him to be prepared for any situation. Or maybe because it had been his responsibility, being in charge of a crew of men, their lives in his hands. Maybe it had been the hostage situation he had been involved in, where he had been afraid that he would have his first fatalities, on home soil no less. It had resolved as well as could be hoped for, but it had marked him, and was most likely the reason that he insisted the doors needed to be locked in their house. One never knew when something was going to happen. It just happened. Therefore, it was best to do everything in one's power to be prepared. He was getting ready to walk to one of the tables that were not cleaned off when he saw a woman rushing by. She slowed as her eyes met his, just for a second, and he felt something odd feather softly through his body. Something like life. Maybe 2 years ago, he wouldn't have noticed it. But it was almost an electrical current that made the parts of him that felt dead inside toggle to life, rise and stretch and open their eyes. He didn't exactly feel alive, but he felt something. The woman wasn't beautiful. Her hair was a mess, piled up on top of her head like she'd done it in a hurry, and there were dark circles under her eyes, like she'd been up since 3 o'clock in the morning and needed a break. Odd he would think that, but even odder that he would want to be the one to tell her to sit down, to rest, that he'd help. He hadn't come out to North Dakota to get involved with a woman, and certainly not with a waitress. That hadn't been his intent at all. He castigated himself for being even tempted to, what? Take the pan from her? Lead her to a table and tell her to sit? Ask her what she was doing and beg her to allow him to do it for her? That was all ridiculous. The moment passed, the woman hurried on, and he continued to survey the room. She had just cleared off a table, apparently, and someone had already sat in it. He saw 2 more tables that needed to be cleared, and his eyes tracked back to the woman who was disappearing into the kitchen to set down her pan of dirty dishes. He laughed a little to himself. He could follow her into the kitchen, grab the container, and go back out and clear off his own table. He started to take 1 step toward the table when he thought, why not? If it was so relaxed around Sweetwater that no one locked their doors, surely it wouldn't be considered a crime to go back and get the tub from the kitchen so he could clean the table, so he could sit down and have supper. He hadn't eaten anything all day, waiting to go into town as long as possible, not wanting to meet people. He wouldn't mind becoming a hermit. And more than that, the thought crossed his mind that if he was going to be dealing with the cold, he might as well deal with it in Antarctica. Except, since he had been dishonorably discharged, it probably wouldn't be possible. He was pretty sure that a person didn't get to go to Antarctica unless they were part of some kind of government agency, which he would never be. Deciding that he'd rather have quick service so he could get in and out, rather than sitting and waiting for someone to clear off the table in front of him, he changed his direction, pointing his steps toward the kitchen. A little girl who'd been sitting behind the counter, the one he'd noticed on both sweeps his gaze had taken of the room, eyed him with interest as he walked past the cash register through the little walkway and behind the counter. "Are you Laia?" she asked. He jerked his head, not agreeing to her statement but just acknowledging her words. Mom is going to die. She'll be so glad you're here. I was going to get the tub and clear off that table, he said, jerking his head toward the table he'd been planning to sit at. Could she really think he was some kind of new hire or something? He didn't want to give that impression. Did he look like he was a waitress? Impossible. The girl was sitting there, comfortable and at ease, like she was there a lot. She would have recognized the hired help. Awesome, the little girl said, jumping up and hurrying in front of him. He must have been right. People in this small town really did take casual to a whole new level. Hopefully the prices of the food reflected the fact that patrons had to clear off their own tables. It was crazy that people were required to work before they could eat. Come on, the girl said, looking behind her and seeing that he hadn't followed her. He thought she was going to bring the pan out for him. Well, these people were really weird. Still, his stomach rumbled, and he figured that if this got him food sooner, he'd oblige. But in the meantime, he was going to ask his buddies if there was any place other than this quirky little diner where a man could get served without having to work first. When it's full, you just empty them into the sink. When you get a chance, you rinse them, put them in the tray, and run them through the washer. The girl showed him what to do, talking as she worked, pulling the dishes that were in the pan out as she talked, and then handing the empty pan back to him. She rinsed the rag off in the sink and showed him how to sanitize it, and then basically shooed him back out of the kitchen. That seemed like an awful lot of information that a person needed to just clear off a table. Hi, this is Jay, and thanks for listening. If you're ready for another great audiobook, here's one we think you might like. Or check out the playlist with all our latest releases. Don't forget to subscribe to Say with Jay, give this video a thumbs up, and tell us what you liked in the comments.